February 2021 was the last time that I spoke to my ex. So February 16th was the date. And as I said before, leading up to the goodbye or my pursuit of the Lord, there were steps that I was taking, I would say even from Lord, speak through me. From broken to broken. This is my story, my testimony. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of From Broken to Broken. We are on episode 6, and this episode we're going to talk about dealing with grief and loss. And this was something that I experienced very deeply in 2021, and I would say even the years beyond that. So I first want to say that we know that grief is something that everyone experiences. We've all lost someone that's near and dear to us, as well as not only can you grieve people that you've lost, also we can grieve places we've left, and things that have meant something to us that we've lost along the way. So I want to first just say that I truly understand that we all handle grief differently. And know that in me sharing my story, I'm sharing my encounter with grief and what I've gone through. But I also share this to say that I understand that some of you, as you listen to my story, it may remind you of your own grief. But this is the first time I'm actually speaking about a number of things publicly. I've spoken about loss in pockets in my testimony, but this will be the first time that I'm sharing a lot of different pieces with you. So thank you first for watching. For those who don't know me, my name is Melinda. And as I said before in the previous videos, I'm grateful for you all just even taking the time to watch these. But I'll be reading questions that we have here in regards to grief and just share a little bit about my testimony. The first question is, tell us about grieving while transitioning and being transformed by God. This part of my story, so as I spoke about before, 2020 was the year that I encountered the Lord, and He told me to basically live my life for Him and wanted me to start teaching Bible study. During that year, I was, as I've mentioned in the past videos, I had one foot in the world, and I also had one foot that was following the Lord. And with that being said, I was still doing things with my friends like partying, although during that time, if you remember, COVID came. And so during the period of COVID, we were on lockdown. So most of the different things we did took place in someone's home. And a lot of times that ended up being my home. So we would all hang out. People would come over. A smaller group during that time would come over. As I've mentioned before, we were drinking and listening to music, dancing, all sorts of things. Well, as my walk with the Lord started to progress, so by the end of 2020, I had already started teaching Bible study. God had started that work on my heart to where I would say probably about that year, I knew that there were certain things in my life that I would have to change. The relationship that I was in that I knew I was going to have to leave. I knew that there were going to be other areas of my life that I would have to change as well because of my encounters with the Lord, and because at this point I'm reading the Bible and reading the Word and seeing how we're supposed to live our life as followers of Christ. So probably about, I would say, the end of 2020, I knew things would have to change. So in itself, I would say for that year, I even started grieving at that point, knowing that I was going to have to walk away from things that I love so much. And what I mean by that is I knew, one, the relationship I was in, the person I was involved with, I knew that I was going to have to separate from them. So there was a part of grieving while I was still in the relationship. And then also, I would say, even for my friendship during that time, I could see my friendships were starting to change. So about 2021 is, as you all know, was the year that I told the Lord, hey, I'm going to live my life fully for you. And that year, I just remember after taking the step of faith to say, God, I'm all in. As I said before, I stopped drinking completely. I at that point, the person that I was involved with, I ended that relationship. And then at this point, I am fully living my life for the Lord. So what did that look like? My time was spent reading the Bible, probably about March. So this all happened the middle of February. By March timeframe, I started going to church. I was in church. I was reading the Bible. And I literally was surrounding myself with everything that I knew that I needed to progress my walk with the Lord, because I knew that my flesh was weak. And I knew that in order for me to live my life for the Lord, I was going to have to be solely focused on anything that was going to build my spirit, anything that was going to be edifying to me. Also, because of my pursuit of God, I had started to change. My friends actually noticed a change in me before I even noticed. I remember there were times when my friends would say, Melinda, you're different. And I'm like, different how? You know, in my eyes, I saw myself the same. And they would say, but you're different. And I'm like, different how? And they were like, you're just different. And they started to see the change in me, although it took me a little bit later to see it in myself. But that caused my relationships to begin to change. I remember there probably a few months after, and two, also in 2021, things started to open back up. And so people were more willing to go out to different locations and different things. So things started to loosen some. And I just remember during those time frames that even my friends, as they would go hang out, sometimes they would go hang out and not invite me. And I remember that was really, really hard during that time frame, because although I knew that even if they invited me, I wasn't going to go, because I knew the path that I was on. I knew I had to be focused. And also, too, I lost the desire to do some of those things, but I still had to deal with the fact that I was left out. And one thing about me, I've had the same friends for a very, very long time. My closest friends are people that I've been friends with, I think the longest, about 20 plus years. So these are friends I've had, one of my longest standing friends since middle school. A lot of my friends I've had since high school. So majority of my really, really close friendships have been 10 plus years. And we go through periods to where, we're all living our lives, but during that time frame, we were always together. And so to see that change happen, it was something that I started to grieve. And I remember even struggling with that at certain points of feeling alone. Now, one thing about God, though, in those situations, one of my prayers to the Lord was, God, bring me those who are on a like-minded walk as me. And as I started to grow even further in my walk with the Lord, a beautiful thing that he started to do was reconnect me even with people from my past. And so he started to bring people from my past that I knew, friendships, and these are not just people, but these were friends that I had that over the years we just lost connection. And he started to restore some of those friendships from the past of people who were on a similar walk. And so although there was a level of grief that happened because I was changing, because things around me were changing, God still brought people around me so that ultimately I was not in a place to where I felt alone. The next question is, what was it like having to leave the LGBT community? This part of my walk was very tough, leaving the community. And I say that because one thing you have to realize for those who are watching, and I know they call it something different now. I call it LGBT because that's what it was called back then. But what you have to realize about the LGBT community is the LGBT community embraces everyone. It is a community that is built on accepting everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean regardless of how you look, regardless of who you date. It's a community that's built around acceptance and is built around showing each other love. And being someone who was coming out of that community, so here I am, been a part of that community for almost 20 years, now walking in deliverance, God showing me, as I said in the previous video, showing me, hey, this isn't right, this doesn't align. Also changing me on the inside. There was, for a very, very long time, that was the place that I belonged. That was the community that I identified with. So having to leave that community was very tough. I remember one of the first moments that I had to come to terms with leaving the community. I think I went to the doctor's office. And I was at the doctor's office and I was at the Women's Health Center. They give you a questionnaire you have to fill out, and it's all these questions about, your gender, questions about your age, birthday, what are different health issues you're dealing with. But now they have a question that asks you about your sexual preference. And so when I saw that question, for so many years, I always identified myself as, at first it was bisexual and then it was gay. And I remember looking at that question, and I think I took a picture of it as well, but I looked at that question and I couldn't circle gay because I wasn't gay anymore. And I had to circle, I think it said heterosexual is what it had listed. And that was one of the first moments that I had to consciously even, I would say, deal or I had to consciously identify myself as someone who is heterosexual. And I even, like I said, it took me a moment as I was staring at the picture. I remember leaving there and calling a friend. But doing that, taking that step was something that I would say was really, really hard, because there were times in my walk to where, and especially when I first left the community and I first gave my yes to the Lord, I felt like I didn't belong in either place. I didn't feel I was gay because I was walking out and God started changing my heart. And I wasn't quite to the place to where I was able to identify as heterosexual. So here I was leaving one community, but not yet feeling accepted into another community. So there was a period of time to where I truly felt like I was alone. I felt like I was different in a sense. And it took time. It really took time for God to continue to do the work in my heart, that I could say, hey, I'm out. Hey, I no longer belong in this place. But being that it's such a community that accepts people and really embraces them, and yet I still didn't feel fully embraced on the other side, it was a big sense of loss, but also a loss that made me feel lost. And I would say, if it wasn't for that group of people that God connected me with, that I just shared with you all, I honestly don't know how much I would have made it through some of the challenging times of my walk. during that period, because I didn't have either group to lean on, and even before God brought the friends, what it did was it drew me in a place where I was closer to the Lord. It honestly, that's what it did. It drew me to a place to where I said, God, you're all I have. I have nothing else. And so that was really, I think that was really instrumental in my walk, because it made me fully rely on the Lord during that point. So it brought me to a place of more intimacy with God, which ultimately deepened my relationship with Him as I continue in my pursuit of Him. The next question says, in 2021, you dealt with the loss of your ex. Talk about that experience. And this is something that I haven't really spoken about publicly. Talked about pieces of it in my testimony video. So for those who don't know, in 2021 was the year that I gave the Lord my full yes. So in February, I told the Lord that I'm going to live my life for Him. I was involved with someone during that time, and the short of the story was my last time speaking to them. I drove them home, told them goodbye, and I remember the last conversation I had with them was I told them to live their life for the Lord, and basically told them, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I basically told them, like, in the tough times, lean on the Lord, because that's what I'm about to do. And I remember dropping them off. I dropped her off at home, and as I dropped her off at home, I said goodbye and then went home and talked to her maybe one more time that day. And then after then, I knew that in order for me to move forward in my walk with the Lord, I was going to have to block her. And so I blocked her number and really just continued my pursuit of the Lord. And I would say when that happened, we had dated, we dated for dated for about 2 years, almost 2 years at that point. And leaving that relationship was really hard. And so after I said the goodbye, I grieved even just the loss of that relationship. I spent days just grieving and crying and just really, like most of us who have left relationships that were hard. I was hurt, but I knew it was what I had to do. And I just remember the Lord in His graciousness, after a few days of me crying, how the Lord told me, He said, in a dream, He showed me and her, and we were tied together. It was like there was a tie that was connecting us, and He said, it is broken. And I remember waking up the next morning, and after I had that dream, and I felt much lighter. Although I was still grieving the loss of the relationship, I just felt much lighter. And I kept on going about my day, because I knew at that point, I knew that I was supposed to be teaching, because God had already told me to teach Bible study. So I knew that my focus needed to be on what God has called me to do. So as I said before, I just really push more into that. So time goes on, and about 4 months, so this was February, so about 4 months after that day, I get a call I would say I got a text message. I got a text that I will never forget. And the text that I received was that she passed. And I just remember the day that I got that text message, I just remember my whole world was crushed. And my world was crushed because even though I knew that I had to leave, I knew that I was in pursuit of the Lord, there was always still love there for her. And to be, one of the things that God told me when I tell my story, He told me to be transparent. So I want to keep it as transparent and real as I can. It was a struggle because even after I left the relationship, the Lord had me. I remember there was probably a month or two after saying yes to the Lord that He had me get rid of everything in my home that was tied to an ex of mine. So I spent literally like a day just going through bags and everything that I had been given, like everything that I had, I'm like putting it in bags. And like to end up, I think I ended up donating everything or what I had. And I just remember after the Lord had me do that, because at that point, I was like, I want to do everything I can to move forward. I told the Lord, I was like, God, I don't want anything to hinder me or anything to hold me back. So if He's like, at that point, if He told me to get rid of something, I'm like, all right, done. So I was just putting stuff in bags and like, I mean, and then even to the point of the Lord had me to start deleting photos. So I'm going through my phones. I'm going through tablets, like everywhere I could find photos, and I'm deleting. And so I did all of that. And mainly because I knew that in order for me to be free from homosexuality, I knew that my actions had to be drastic. Like I knew that there was going to be a certain level of sacrifice that was going to have to happen for me to be free. Because I always share with people, like, coming out of that, especially because I feel like it has such a stronghold on you. I literally explained to people, I said, coming out of it is like, if you've ever watched, and maybe I've explained this in one of the other videos, I can't recall, but I tell people, like, if you ever watched Spider-Man and I think it's the second, not the first one with Tobey Maguire, but the second one with, I think it's Andrew Lincoln, how Venom, the scene at the end when Venom and Andrew Lincoln is, and I believe that's his name. If I get it wrong, then please forgive me. But he is Venom, and basically Spider-Man is trying to, or maybe it's not Andrew Lincoln. Actually, I'm getting it wrong. It is Tobey Maguire, but it's the one where Venom is Spider-Man is trying to free him because he sees that with Venom, and if you recall in that movie, there was a point in time where Spider-Man was attached to Venom, but it brought out the worst in him. And he saw that he had a stronghold, but you saw that Spider-Man knew that in order to free him, he was going to have to pull him out. And so in that scene, he sets up, he saw that Venom's weakness was sound, and so he sets up a sound barrier, but then takes the step to pull him out. And as he was pulling him out, what you see is Venom was so attached to him, it was like literally pulling off of a skin for him to be free. So I always explain to people about being delivered from homosexuality, for me, felt just as that. It was like a pulling of what was attached to me, even in the deepest parts of me that had to pull away. And so I knew that in order for me to remain free, that something drastic would have to take place in terms of my pursuit for the Lord. So when God would ask me to do things like delete photos, get rid of memorable items, I did it, majority of the time, I did it without question. I was like, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, and let's get rid of that. So I got rid of all those things, and I'm giving this background to fast forward back to when she passed. And so I'm getting rid of all these things. And then months later, when she passed, and as I said, my world was crushed and my world was broken, I had nothing to hold on to. Like, I had no photos to scroll to hold on to. I had nothing in the tangible form in my house to hold on to. I literally had nothing to hold on to when she passed. I think later I found some photos, maybe through social media, but I literally had nothing to hold on to when she passed. And the part that was the hardest for me, I mean, there are several pieces that were really hard. when she transitioned was there was like a period of time, I would say, I was conflicted. And although God had removed the romantic love, so at this point God had removed the romantic love towards women, I still loved her. And I still had a deep love for her because although she was someone I dated, she was still my best friend. And I just remember, thinking, even while I wasn't talking to her, I remember thinking, Lord, maybe once I'm delivered and she progresses in her walk with you, we'll come back together as friends. And so when she passed, it was that reality of she's gone. And I was crushed. I mean, crushed is an understatement, but I was broken. That's the word. It broke me. And it was a pain that honestly I pray to the Lord that I never have to deal with that again. But I say all that to say that time was really hard for me because here I am serving the Lord. And I remember telling this to the Lord. I said, God, I've given you everything, but you took the one person that I loved. And although I knew, and I'll tell you later, the Lord confirmed to me through different ways that she was with him. But I said to say, although I'm a firm believer of everything happens for a reason, I'm a firm believer of everything's for our good, it was something I just truly didn't understand. And one thing that I love about the Lord through that is that he was so gracious. So I was working during that time, and my job was so gracious to allow me time off. So I took bereavement from work. I took about a month off from work because for me, I couldn't work. And during that time frame, I would tell you that I drew closer to the Lord than I ever have before. During that time frame also was a time frame where my friends stepped up for me more than I could ever ask for. When she passed, the same friends that my relationship with them started to change, they showed up for me and they actually sit with me. I remember they sat with me around the clock for about a week. People took turns just sitting with me. And I was very, very thankful that God blessed me with the people in my life who were there for me when I needed it the most. But I will say that during that time, it really broke me. And I stopped teaching Bible study during that time. I didn't stop, I wasn't angry with the Lord or anything, but I did stop teaching. And I just remember probably after a month went by and I was in a place to where I was sitting there thinking like, Lord, I don't know how I can move forward. I was like, God, I'm in so much pain. I remember even waking up and calling my mom, and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I'm in so much pain, I don't know what to do with it. And she just always encouraged me. She's like, well, give it to the Lord, go to the Lord. And I continued to. But I would tell you, probably about a month after her passing, that I went to a conference. And as I went to the conference, the woman there was speaking. And I remember going there because at this point I was like, Lord, I don't know what you want me to do. And the woman was speaking and she mentioned, she said, for some of you, you're looking for a sign and this is your sign to keep going. And when I heard that, I knew the Lord was speaking to me. I said, I know that God is speaking to me because I came there for a word for direction. And as I heard that, I was like, okay, I know I have to keep going. And so what that meant was that I had to keep teaching. I had to keep showing up to do what God had called me to do. It meant that even in the midst of my pain, I couldn't just not do anything. I had to keep stepping forward. So a few weeks after that conference, I reached back out to the Bible study group at the time, and I told them, I said, hey, y'all, we're going to start back up. And so I started back up teaching, and as I was teaching, it was very tough at first, because as I was teaching, I had a lot of hidden pain. I was still in pain. I was still very much grieving through that entire process. But as I said before, God really showed me that he was gracious. There were times when the pain would be so much, and I would ask God, I'm like, God, I need you to comfort me, and the pain would ease. And so I'm just so thankful for the Lord that he has carried me through one of the hardest periods, I would say definitely in my walk with him, but one of the hardest things I've had to deal with in my life. I've lost people in my past, people that I love dearly, but this was a different type of loss that I hadn't had to deal with. And interestingly enough, this month is actually the anniversary of her passing. As I'm recording this video, we're in June, and this is the anniversary of her passing. And so there was a rawness that I even felt as the anniversary approached, that I had to press through. But even in the midst of it, God again still always shows that he is faithful. The next question is, tell us about grieving while in purpose. So I want to talk a little bit about the process of grieving while you're in your purpose. Because the loss was so close to my heart, it created a rawness in me. I remember during that time frame just being so raw emotionally. It was like if you think about just a wound that was just completely wide open. Because of that, even just my ability, I would say even I was just very sensitive during that time, very sensitive. I had to even protect myself even more, because I'm the type of person, I have such a giving heart, and I'm always want to help people. But during this time frame, I didn't have the capacity to. I even remember after she passed, and of course, the posts went up and people saw, people knew, they reached out. And some people would reach out to me wanting even friendships with me. And I had to tell them, I don't have the capacity to even be your friend, because I was just so raw inside. But I'll tell you one thing about the rawness that was inside of me was, through the grief, the Lord began to uproot things that I hadn't healed from. So because I was in a space to where I was completely open, and because not only was I completely open, but I was also in a space to where I was pressing into the Lord even more, there was a uprooting that God began to do. Because also I had to get back in therapy. Like, I had to get back in therapy. I remember my therapist even cried with me, because this was a therapist I had even before I had met her. So my therapist knew everything leading up to it. She knew all of the details of my relationships and things that were going on just in my life in general during that time. And so I ended up having to get back in therapy, because I knew that being that I hadn't had a loss to that degree, I knew that I needed a therapist to help me navigate the different things that would come up. I also had to do a reading on grief itself, because the last person I had lost was like my grandmother, and that was in 2007. So that had been some years. And I didn't have full understanding of the stages of grief. I didn't really know what to expect. And so I spent time reading about the different stages so that I knew at least what to expect, even though you can read a book, how you deal with it may be different. And I would say during that time frame, as I was in therapy And as I was wide open in pressing into God, God began to show me things in me that hadn't been healed. And so this is where also the revealing started to happen about past relationships. And even as I mentioned before, to where the Lord showed me about, hey, you've been holding on to unforgiveness here. Or, hey, because of this situation that has hurt you here, it's one of the reasons why this happened. So there was a lot of uprooting that began to take place during that time frame just because of the rawness and the openness of me before the Lord. And so although this was one of the hardest times in my walk, because I did it so closely with the Lord, it ended up being a period that brought so much great healing and restoration to my life. Because again, I was in a place to where I was vulnerable, but also I was in a place to where I was submitted to the Lord because I knew that I couldn't do it without him. I knew for a fact, I was like, God, there is no way I'll be able to get through this without you. And so I knew that there was a dependence on him, and anything that he was going to have me do was not something that was meant to harm me, but something that was meant to be for my good. So I had to ultimately trust the process and allow him to do the work and the uprooting in me. Last question is, any last words for those who are watching? My last words are, don't run from the breaking. So if you're in a position to where God is removing things, so if you're in a position to where you've been seeking the Lord and God has been shifting things in your life, God has been removing things in your life, don't run from the breaking. So don't run from it. I always say, in order to heal, you have to feel. And sometimes because of the pain of having to leave or of the loss, sometimes we want to mask the pain by distracting ourselves or throwing ourselves into work, throwing ourselves into the family and kids. But my last words are, don't run from the breaking. Lean into it. And the way you lean into it is to acknowledge it, to say, I'm here. The breaking is happening, I'm here, but also to say, I'm here. And the I'm here is, Lord, I'm here at your feet. Lord, I'm in a place to where I'm submitted to you so that you can do the work in me. Because if you truly get to that place in the breaking and submit to the Lord, one, the Lord will give you what you need. He knows what we need, so he'll give you what you need. But two, you'll notice that some of those layers and those things that have built up over the years, he'll start to do the work in you to where it won't have to be, and I like to always share this because sometimes we try to force change. We see a behavior or something about ourselves that we don't like and we try to change it. And then what ends up happening is we struggle with it because we're trying to force change. But instead of forcing the change, if you just simply sit at his feet, if you just simply submit to him and say, Lord, what am I to do? Go to God in prayer, spend time building yourself up in the word. If you do those things, you won't have to force the change because the change will naturally happen. Because what God will do is he will change your heart and he will transform you to make you more like him and also more like the person that he created you to be. Thank you for watching From Broken to Broken. To stay connected and see what's next, like, comment, and subscribe.